Judith clutched her rosary so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The doctors had given her daughter just 3 days to live. In her desperation, she whispered a prayer she had learned from her grandmother decades ago. Within hours, something extraordinary happened that would change everything. The same prayer that saved Judith's daughter is the one you're about to discover today. If you've ever felt like your prayers weren't reaching heaven, if you've ever wondered why some people seem to receive miracles while others wait endlessly, then what you're about to hear will transform your understanding of divine intervention forever. But first, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what I'm sharing today could be the answer to prayers you've been carrying in your heart for years. Saint Anthony of Padua didn't just perform miracles during his lifetime in the 13th century. He continues to work wonders today, and there's a specific way to approach him that has proven effective for countless believers across the globe. The woman whose story I just shared learned this secret from her grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother, passed down through generations of faithful Catholics who understood something most people miss. You see, Saint Anthony isn't just the patron saint of lost things, though that's what many people know him for. He's the saint of the impossible, the advocate for desperate situations, the heavenly intercessor who specializes in urgent cases. There's a reason why he's called upon when time is running out and hope seems lost. The prayer you're about to learn has been whispered in hospital rooms, spoken in empty churches at midnight, and recited by mothers holding their children close to their hearts. But here's what most people don't realize about approaching Saint Anthony. They make the same mistake over and over again, and it's costing them their miracles. They pray to him like they would pray to any other saint, without understanding his unique spiritual gifts and how to properly invoke his intercession. This isn't about superstition or magic. It's about understanding the divine order and how certain saints have been blessed with specific graces. Let me share something that might surprise you. In 1946, a young soldier named Joseph was trapped behind enemy lines in Korea. He had been separated from his unit for 3 days, wounded, and running out of water. His wife had given him a small medal of St. Anthony before he deployed, and in that moment of desperation, he remembered the prayer his Italian grandmother had taught him. He recited it 3 times, as instructed, and within an hour, an American patrol found him in terrain they had searched twice before. This isn't an isolated incident. Throughout history, there have been documented cases of St. Anthony's intervention in seemingly impossible situations. The key lies in understanding not just what to pray, but how to pray it, when to pray it, and what attitude of heart is required. The prayer itself is simple, deceptively simple, but its power lies in the preparation of the soul and the specific way it's offered. Drop a comment below if you've ever experienced something unexplainable after praying to St. Anthony. I read every single comment, and your story might be featured in a future video. But first, let me tell you about the 3 essential elements that make this prayer so effective. The first element is timing. St. Anthony responds most powerfully when approached during specific moments of the day. This isn't about following rigid rules, but about aligning ourselves with the natural rhythm of prayer that he himself followed during his earthly life. He was known to pray intensely during the hours between midnight and dawn, when the world was quiet and the veil between heaven and earth seemed thinnest. The second element is intention. This isn't about asking for lottery numbers or material possessions. St. Anthony's intercession is reserved for genuine needs, health crises, family emergencies, situations where human effort has reached its limit. He responds to desperation, but not to greed. He answers the prayers of those who have exhausted their own resources and turn to heaven as their final hope. The third element is preparation. You cannot approach St. Anthony casually and expect miraculous results. Your heart must be properly prepared through confession, fasting, and acts of charity. This isn't about earning God's favor, but about creating the spiritual conditions necessary for divine intervention. Saints work through grace, and grace flows most freely through purified vessels. Here's what happened to Margaret, a 45-year-old teacher from Ohio. Her son had been missing for 6 days. Police had searched everywhere, organized community search parties, and followed every lead. On the 7th day, Margaret's neighbor, an elderly Italian woman named Rosa, came to her door with a candle and a prayer card. Rosa told her about the special prayer to Saint Anthony that had been in her family for generations. Margaret was Protestant, but desperation has a way of opening hearts to new possibilities. Rosa lit the candle, and together they knelt in Margaret's living room. Rosa recited the prayer 3 times, and Margaret repeated each word, even though she didn't understand the Latin phrases. They agreed to meet every hour throughout the night to repeat the prayer. At 4:17 a.m., Margaret's phone rang. Her son had been found sleeping in an abandoned building 12 miles away, a building that had been searched twice by different teams. He was unharmed, claiming he had been trying to find his way home but kept getting turned around. The strangest part was that he had no memory of the past 6 days, except for a recurring dream about a man in brown robes who kept telling him to stay where he was because help was coming. This story illustrates something crucial about St. Anthony's intercession. He doesn't just find lost people, he protects them while they're lost. He doesn't just answer prayers, he orchestrates circumstances in ways that seem impossible to human understanding. When you pray to St. Anthony with genuine faith and proper preparation, you're not just asking for a favor, you're inviting divine intervention into your situation. If you're finding this helpful, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Prayer is meant to be shared, and miracles multiply when faith is spread from heart to heart. The prayer I'm about to share with you has been translated from the original Latin, but I'll also provide you with the Latin version pinned in the comment section of this video for those who prefer to pray in the ancient language. Many believe that Latin prayers carry special power because they connect us to centuries of faithful Catholics who have used these same words to petition heaven. But first, let me tell you about the proper way to prepare for this prayer. You cannot simply read these words and expect miracles. The saints respond to sincere hearts, not to casual requests. Saint Anthony, in particular, has a way of testing the faith of those who approach him. He wants to see if you truly believe in the power of intercession, or if you're just trying another method after human solutions have failed. The preparation begins with confession. If you haven't been to confession recently, this is essential. Not because God won't hear your prayers otherwise, but because a clear conscience creates the spiritual conditions necessary for miraculous intervention. Sin creates barriers between the soul and heaven, and those barriers can interfere with the flow of grace. Next, you should fast for at least 24 hours before praying this prayer. This doesn't mean you can't drink water or take necessary medications, but you should abstain from solid food if your health permits. Fasting has been a preparation for prayer since biblical times because it demonstrates to heaven that you're serious about your request. It shows that you're willing to sacrifice something for the sake of your petition. The third preparation is almsgiving. Give something to charity, money, food, clothing, or your time. The amount doesn't matter as much as the sacrifice involved. Saint Anthony was known for his care of the poor, and he responds favorably to those who show similar compassion. This isn't about buying God's favor, but about aligning your heart with the values of the saint you're petitioning. A woman named Carmen from Mexico City wrote to me about her experience with this prayer. Her husband had been in a coma for 3 weeks after a construction accident. The doctors had told her to prepare for the worst. A friend told her about the special prayer to Saint Anthony, and Carmen began the preparation process immediately. She went to confession for the first time in years, fasted for 36 hours, and donated her husband's tools to a local charity that helped unemployed men find work. Then, at midnight on a Tuesday, she lit a white candle and began the prayer. She prayed it 3 times, as instructed, and then repeated it every hour until dawn. The next morning, when she arrived at the hospital, her husband was awake and asking for water. The doctors were amazed, calling it a spontaneous recovery that they couldn't explain medically. His brain scans showed no signs of the damage they had expected, and he was discharged 4 days later with no lasting effects from the accident. Carmen's story demonstrates the power of proper preparation combined with unwavering faith. She didn't just pray the words, she created the spiritual conditions necessary for St. Anthony's intervention. She approached him not as a last resort, but as a powerful intercessor who required appropriate reverence and preparation. Here's something that might challenge your understanding of how miracles work. St. Anthony doesn't always answer prayers the way we expect. Sometimes what we think we need isn't what we actually need. Sometimes the miracle isn't in getting what we ask for, but in receiving something better than we could have imagined. Take the case of Father Michael, a priest in Boston who was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He prayed the St. Anthony prayer for healing, following all the preparation requirements. Instead of physical healing, he received something unexpected, the complete absence of fear and an overwhelming sense of peace. He lived 8 more months, but they were the most spiritually fruitful months of his life. He led dozens of people to faith, reconciled with family members who had been estranged, and prepared for death with such grace that his funeral became a celebration of faith rather than a time of mourning. Was this a miracle? Absolutely. Not the miracle he asked for, but the miracle he needed. St. Anthony saw beyond the physical request to the deeper spiritual need. This is why approaching him requires such faith. You must be willing to trust that his intercession will bring about God's will, even if it doesn't match your human understanding of what should happen. I want you to comment below about a time when you didn't get what you prayed for, but later realized you received something better. These stories remind us that God's perspective is so much wider than our own, and saints like Anthony help us see our situations through divine eyes. The prayer itself is surprisingly simple. It's not filled with complicated theological language or lengthy petitions. Instead, it's a direct appeal to St. Anthony's proven ability to intercede in desperate situations. The power lies not in the words themselves, but in the faith and preparation behind them. Here is the prayer. St. Anthony, gentle and powerful saint, you who have been blessed with the special gift of finding what is lost and helping those in desperate need, I come to you in this urgent hour. My heart is heavy with worry, and human solutions have failed me. I place my trust in your intercession before the throne of God. You know the secrets of heaven and the needs of earth. You understand the cry of the desperate and the prayer of the faithful. Look upon my situation with compassion, and if it is God's will, grant me the miracle I so desperately need. I promise to live a life more pleasing to God, to increase my charity toward others, and to spread devotion to you among all who will listen. Saint Anthony, do not let me pray in vain. Amen. This prayer should be recited 3 times, with a Hail Mary between each recitation. The repetition of the prayer 3 times is significant. It represents the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and it demonstrates persistence in prayer. St. Anthony himself was known to pray repeatedly until he received an answer, and he expects the same dedication from those who seek his intercession. But here's something crucial that many people miss. After praying this prayer, you must watch for signs of St. Anthony's response. He doesn't usually answer with dramatic supernatural events. Instead, he works through circumstances, through people, through seemingly natural occurrences that are actually divinely orchestrated. A businessman named Robert from Chicago learned this lesson the hard way. His company was facing bankruptcy, and he had been praying the St. Anthony prayer for weeks without seeing any results. He was about to give up when he decided to pray one more time, this time with complete surrender to God's will. The next day, a man walked into his office claiming to be a potential investor. Robert had never met this man, and his company wasn't publicly seeking investors. The man offered to buy enough shares to save the company, but only if Robert agreed to donate 10% of all future profits to local charities. Robert agreed, and the deal was completed within a week. Later, Robert discovered that the investor had heard about his company through a chain of conversations that began with a nun who had been praying for struggling businesses. The nun had been devoted to St. Anthony for 40 years, and she had specifically mentioned Robert's company in her prayers. The miracle wasn't in the money appearing from nowhere, it was in the orchestration of circumstances that brought the right person to the right place at the right time. This is how St. Anthony typically works. He doesn't violate the laws of nature, but he coordinates events in ways that seem impossible to human planning. He opens doors that should be closed, brings people together who should never meet, and creates opportunities that shouldn't exist. You're probably wondering why St. Anthony has this particular gift. The answer lies in his life story and his special relationship with the Christ child. According to tradition, St. Anthony was once praying in his cell when the Christ child appeared to him and remained for an extended conversation. This mystical experience gave him unique insight into God's will and special power to intercede for others. Moreover, St. Anthony's dedication to finding lost souls during his lifetime has been rewarded with the ability to find lost things, lost people, and lost hope in the afterlife. He spent his earthly ministry seeking out sinners, bringing them back to God, and helping them find their way to salvation. This spiritual gift has been magnified in his heavenly state. If this video is helping you understand St. Anthony's intercession better, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We share powerful prayers, saint stories, and spiritual insights that can transform your faith life. There's another aspect of this prayer that requires careful attention: the promise you make to St. Anthony. You're not bargaining with God or trying to bribe heaven. Instead, you're demonstrating your serious intention to live a more faithful life if your prayer is answered. This promise creates a spiritual contract between you and the saint, and it must be honored if you receive the miracle you've requested. The promise has 3 parts: living a life more pleasing to God, increasing your charity toward others, and spreading devotion to St. Anthony. These aren't burdens. They're pathways to deeper faith and greater spiritual fulfillment. Many people find that fulfilling these promises brings them more joy than the original miracle they requested. Living a life more pleasing to God means examining your daily choices and aligning them with Catholic teaching. It means regular prayer, frequent reception of the sacraments, and avoiding serious sin. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but it does mean you have to be sincere in your efforts to grow in holiness. Increasing your charity toward others involves both material and spiritual works of mercy. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick, but also instruct the ignorant, comfort the sorrowful, and pray for the living and the dead. St. Anthony was known for his care of the poor and his patient teaching of the faith. Following his example in these areas honors his intercession. Spreading devotion to St. Anthony can be as simple as telling others about your experience with this prayer. Share your story, give out prayer cards, or donate to churches in his honor. The saint delights in being known and loved by more people, and he responds favorably to those who help increase his devotion. Let me share a remarkable story about the power of keeping these promises. A woman named Teresa from the Philippines prayed the St. Anthony prayer for her son, who had been addicted to drugs for 5 years. She followed all the preparation requirements and made the 3-fold promise with complete sincerity. Within 2 weeks, her son agreed to enter a rehabilitation program, something he had refused to do for years. During his recovery, Teresa faithfully kept her promises. She attended daily Mass, volunteered at a local soup kitchen, and distributed St. Anthony prayer cards to everyone she met. Her son completed the program successfully and has been clean for 3 years. But here's the remarkable part. Teresa's faithful keeping of her promises led to a second miracle. Her husband, who had been away from the church for 20 years, began attending Mass with her. He was so impressed by the changes in her life and the obvious blessing on their family that he returned to the sacraments. Their marriage, which had been struggling for years, was renewed and strengthened. Teresa's story illustrates how keeping promises to St. Anthony often leads to blessings beyond the original request. The saint rewards faithfulness with continued protection and intercession. Those who honor their commitments to him often find themselves under his special care for years to come. There's also a proper way to thank St. Anthony when your prayer is answered. Gratitude is essential in the spiritual life, and saints appreciate being acknowledged for their intercession. The traditional way to thank St. Anthony is to have a Mass said in his honor, to make a donation to a church or charity in his name, or to perform some act of service for others. Some people choose to visit a church dedicated to St. Anthony, lighting candles and spending time in prayer before his statue or relic. Others make pilgrimages to Padua, Italy, where his tomb is located and where countless miracles have been reported. The important thing is that your gratitude is expressed through action, not just words. A man named David from Australia experienced this principle firsthand. His daughter had been born with a serious heart defect that required multiple surgeries. Before her third surgery, David prayed the St. Anthony prayer with complete faith and proper preparation. The surgery was successful beyond all medical expectations, and his daughter made a full recovery. David kept his promise to St. Anthony by organizing an annual fundraiser for children's heart research. Over the past 10 years, his events have raised over $500,000 for medical research and direct assistance to families dealing with similar situations. David credits St. Anthony not just with his daughter's healing, but with giving him a life purpose he never had before. The fundraiser has become a celebration of St. Anthony's intercession, with prayer services, testimonials from families who have received help, and educational presentations about the saint's life and miracles. David's daughter, now a healthy teenager, helps organize the events and plans to study medicine so she can continue helping children with heart problems. This story demonstrates how a single miracle can ripple outward, touching hundreds or thousands of lives. When we cooperate with St. Anthony's intercession through faithful promise-keeping, we become instruments of grace for others. Our personal miracle becomes part of a larger pattern of divine intervention in the world. Comment below if you've ever experienced how one blessing led to opportunities to bless others. These stories remind us that miracles aren't just for personal benefit. They're meant to increase faith and spread God's love throughout the world. There are also specific times when St. Anthony's intercession is particularly powerful. His feast day, June 13th, is obviously significant, but he's also known to respond strongly to prayers offered on Tuesdays, which is his traditional day of the week. Many people have reported receiving answers to their prayers when they begin a novena, 9 days of prayer, on a Tuesday. The novena to St. Anthony is a powerful extension of the single prayer I've shared with you. It involves praying the same prayer for 9 consecutive days, along with additional prayers and readings from his life. The preparation requirements remain the same, but the extended period of prayer demonstrates greater commitment and often results in more dramatic interventions. A nurse named Patricia from Canada began a St. Anthony novena when her mother was diagnosed with aggressive cancer. She prayed the prayer 3 times each day for 9 days, fasted on Tuesdays and Fridays, and donated her time to a local cancer support group. On the 9th day of the novena, her mother's doctor called with shocking news. The latest tests showed no trace of cancer in her body. The doctor admitted he had no medical explanation for the disappearance of the tumors. Patricia's mother lived for 8 more healthy years, during which she became a devoted follower of St. Anthony and helped many other people learn this prayer. Her healing story was documented by the local diocese and is now part of the official records of St. Anthony's intercession. This case illustrates several important points about St. Anthony's miracles. First, they often occur gradually rather than instantaneously. Second, they're usually medically inexplicable but not medically impossible. Third, they result in greater faith and devotion, not just for the person who receives the miracle, but for everyone who witnesses it. St. Anthony's approach to miracles is both supernatural and natural. He works within the created order, but he influences it in ways that transcend normal cause and effect. This is why his intercession is so powerful. It doesn't violate God's laws, but it reveals the hidden connections and possibilities that exist within creation. Understanding this helps explain why some prayers to Saint Anthony are answered quickly while others take longer. The saint is working to coordinate multiple factors: the spiritual readiness of the person praying, the divine will regarding the request, and the natural circumstances that must align for the miracle to occur. Sometimes these factors come together quickly, and sometimes they require patience and persistence. The key is to continue praying with faith even when you don't see immediate results. Saint Anthony is always working on your behalf, but his work might not be visible until the moment when everything falls into place. Many people have reported that their breakthroughs came just when they were about to give up, as if the saint was testing their perseverance. A construction worker named Miguel from Texas experienced this principle during a particularly difficult period of his life. He had been unemployed for 6 months, his wife was pregnant with their 3rd child, and they were facing eviction from their apartment. Miguel began praying the Saint Anthony prayer daily, following all the preparation requirements. Week after week passed with no job offers, despite his diligent searching. Miguel's faith was tested severely, but he continued praying and trusting in Saint Anthony's intercession. On what would have been his last day in the apartment, he received a call offering him a position with a construction company that paid better than his previous job. The employer later told Miguel that he had been recommended by a foreman who had heard about his work ethic from a friend of a friend. When Miguel traced the chain of recommendations, he discovered it led back to a man he had helped move furniture 2 years earlier, a man he had completely forgotten about. The connection was so unlikely that Miguel recognized Saint Anthony's hand in orchestrating the circumstances. This story illustrates how Saint Anthony often works through human networks and relationships, creating opportunities that seem natural but are actually divinely arranged. He has a particular gift for bringing the right people together at the right time, often through chains of connection that seem impossible to predict or control. The prayer to Saint Anthony is not just about asking for favors, it's about entering into a relationship with a powerful intercessor who cares about your welfare. The saint delights in helping people, and he's particularly drawn to those who show genuine faith and proper reverence for his intercession. This relationship aspect is crucial to understand. Saint Anthony isn't a cosmic vending machine where you insert prayers and receive miracles. He's a person, a glorified, perfected person in heaven who has maintained his individual personality and preferences. He responds to sincere devotion, consistent prayer, and faithful promise-keeping. If you're serious about developing a relationship with Saint Anthony, consider adopting some of the devotional practices that have been associated with him for centuries. Pray the Rosary while meditating on his life and miracles. Read his sermons and writings, which are filled with spiritual wisdom. Visit churches dedicated to him, especially on his feast day or on Tuesdays. Many people find that carrying a Saint Anthony medal or keeping a prayer card with his image helps them remember to pray to him regularly. These physical reminders aren't magical objects, but they serve as prompts for prayer and expressions of devotion. The saint appreciates being remembered and honored in these traditional ways. Some of the most powerful testimonies about Saint Anthony come from people who have maintained long-term relationships with him. They pray to him regularly, not just in emergencies, and they report receiving his guidance and protection in countless small ways throughout their lives. These people often become powerful intercessors themselves, helping others learn to pray to Saint Anthony effectively. A grandmother named Rose from New York has been devoted to Saint Anthony for over 60 years. She learned the prayer from her Italian mother and has used it to help her family through countless crises. She's seen her husband recover from a heart attack, her children find jobs during recessions, and her grandchildren overcome serious illnesses. Rose's secret is consistency. She prays to Saint Anthony every morning and evening, whether she needs anything specific or not. She maintains a small shrine to him in her home, lights candles in his honor, and gives away prayer cards to anyone who will accept them. Her relationship with Saint Anthony has become the foundation of her spiritual life. Over the years, Rose has helped dozens of people learn to pray to Saint Anthony effectively. She insists on the importance of proper preparation, faithful promise-keeping, and persistent prayer. Her friends and family members call her when they need prayers because they know she has Saint Anthony's ear. Many of them have experienced their own miracles through her intercession. Rose's story demonstrates how devotion to Saint Anthony can become a lifelong source of strength and blessing. The saint rewards faithful devotion with continued protection and intercession. Those who honor him consistently often find themselves under his special care, receiving guidance and assistance in ways that might not even be noticed by others. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear about Saint Anthony's power. Prayer is meant to be shared, and your sharing this video might be the answer to someone's desperate prayer. There's something else about Saint Anthony that makes him uniquely effective as an intercessor: his special relationship with the Christ child. According to mystical tradition, Saint Anthony was once praying in his cell when the Christ child appeared to him and remained for an extended conversation. This experience gave him unique insight into God's heart and special power to intercede for others. The Christ child told Saint Anthony that he would be given the grace to help people find what they had lost, not just material objects, but lost hope, lost faith, and lost souls. This is why Saint Anthony is so effective in desperate situations. He has a direct commission from Jesus to help people in their hour of greatest need. This mystical experience also explains why Saint Anthony is often depicted holding the Christ child. It's not just artistic symbolism, it represents a real spiritual reality. Saint Anthony has special access to Jesus through this mystical relationship, and he uses this access to advocate for those who pray to him with faith. Understanding this helps explain why prayers to Saint Anthony often feel different from prayers to other saints. There's an immediacy and intimacy to his intercession that reflects his unique relationship with Christ. People often report feeling a sense of peace and confidence when they pray to Saint Anthony, as if they know their prayers are being heard and answered. A young mother named Jennifer from Florida experienced this peace during a terrifying situation. Her 2-year-old son had wandered away from their backyard and couldn't be found despite a massive search effort. After 3 hours of searching, Jennifer remembered the Saint Anthony prayer her grandmother had taught her. She found a quiet spot away from the chaos of the search and prayed the prayer 3 times with complete faith. Immediately, she felt a profound peace and an inexplicable certainty that her son was safe. She was able to stay calm and think clearly for the first time since discovering he was missing. Within 30 minutes, her son was found sleeping under a neighbor's porch, completely unharmed. He had apparently crawled through a gap in the fence and gotten tired while exploring. The neighbor had searched that area earlier, but hadn't looked under the porch. Jennifer's peace and confidence had been prophetic. Her son was indeed safe, just as she had felt after praying to Saint Anthony. This story illustrates how Saint Anthony's intercession often brings interior peace along with exterior solutions. The saint doesn't just solve problems. He helps people cope with problems while they're being solved. This dual blessing makes him particularly effective for people dealing with anxiety and fear, along with practical difficulties. The interior peace that comes from Saint Anthony's intercession is itself a miracle. In our anxious age, the ability to remain calm and confident in the face of serious problems is a supernatural gift. This peace allows people to think clearly, make better decisions, and take appropriate action instead of being paralyzed by fear. Many people report that praying to Saint Anthony has changed their entire approach to handling crises. Instead of panicking when problems arise, they immediately turn to prayer and experience the peace that comes from placing their trust in a powerful intercessor. This shift in perspective often leads to better outcomes, even beyond the specific miracle they requested. A businessman named Carlos from Spain discovered this principle during a financial crisis that threatened to destroy his company. Instead of losing sleep and making desperate decisions, he began each day by praying to Saint Anthony for wisdom and guidance. The peace he experienced allowed him to negotiate calmly with creditors, explore creative solutions, and maintain the confidence of his employees. The company's recovery took 6 months, but Carlos later realized that the real miracle wasn't just the financial salvation, it was the transformation of his leadership style. He had learned to face crises with faith instead of fear, and this change made him a more effective leader. His employees noticed the difference and began asking him about his secret to staying calm under pressure. Carlos began sharing the St. Anthony prayer with his employees, and several of them reported their own miracles in personal situations. The prayer became an informal part of the company culture, with employees turning to St. Anthony for help with everything from family problems to work challenges. The business became more resilient and successful as a result of this spiritual foundation. This story demonstrates how St. Anthony's intercession can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. When people learn to pray to him effectively, they often become centers of faith and blessing for others. Their example encourages others to develop their own relationship with the saint, creating a ripple effect of prayer and miracles. The multiplication of St. Anthony's influence through faithful devotees is one of the most beautiful aspects of his intercession. He delights in being known and loved by more people, and he rewards those who help spread his devotion. This is why the promise to spread devotion to St. Anthony is so important. It creates a cycle of blessing that benefits everyone involved. There are also specific ways to honor St. Anthony that increase the effectiveness of your prayers. Tuesday is his traditional day, and many people find that beginning prayers or novenas on Tuesday brings faster results. The practice of giving bread to the poor on Tuesdays is a traditional way to honor St. Anthony, reflecting his care for those in need. Some people keep a St. Anthony box in their homes, a small container where they place prayer requests and thank you notes. Others maintain a special candle that they light when praying to him. These practices aren't superstitious. They're ways of showing reverence and maintaining focus during prayer. The key is to find devotional practices that help you maintain a consistent relationship with St. Anthony. Regular prayer, acts of charity, and spreading his devotion are the foundation, but personal touches that reflect your own spiritual style can enhance your connection with the saint. A retired teacher named Mary from Ireland has maintained a St. Anthony garden for 20 years. She plants flowers in his honor, prays the rosary while tending them, and gives bouquets to people who need prayers. Her garden has become a place of pilgrimage for neighbors and friends who come to pray for special intentions. Mary's garden has been the setting for countless answered prayers. People come to pray among the flowers, and many return to share stories of miracles they've received. The garden has become a tangible reminder of St. Anthony's presence and power in their community. This story illustrates how creative devotion to St. Anthony can create sacred spaces that benefit entire communities. When people dedicate their talents and resources to honoring the saint, he often uses those offerings to bless others. The garden becomes a place of encounter between heaven and earth, where people can experience St. Anthony's intercession in a special way. Comment below about any special ways you honor St. Anthony or any sacred spaces that have been meaningful in your prayer life. These stories inspire others to develop their own creative expressions of devotion. As we near the end of our time together, I want to address a common question about St. Anthony's intercession. People often ask whether non-Catholics can pray to him effectively. The answer is yes. St. Anthony responds to sincere faith regardless of denominational background. He cares about the sincerity of the heart, not the label of the Church. However, full participation in Catholic sacramental life does enhance the effectiveness of prayer to saints. The sacraments provide grace that purifies the soul and creates optimal conditions for divine intervention. This is why the preparation requirements include confession. It's about removing obstacles to grace, not about meeting arbitrary requirements. Non-Catholics who pray to St. Anthony often find themselves drawn to explore Catholic faith more deeply. The saint has a gentle way of leading people toward the fullness of truth, not through force or argument, but through the attraction of his own holiness and the power of his intercession. A Protestant minister named John from Texas began praying to St. Anthony when his daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. He was initially hesitant about praying to saints, but his desperation overcame his theological reservations. He followed the preparation requirements as best he could, including fasting and charitable giving. His daughter's treatment was remarkably successful, and John became convinced that St. Anthony had interceded for her healing. This experience led him to study Catholic teaching about the communion of saints and the role of intercession in Christian prayer. Eventually, John and his family entered the Catholic Church, drawn by the richness of sacramental life and the power of saintly intercession. John's story is not uncommon. St. Anthony has a particular gift for helping people overcome religious barriers and find their way to the Catholic Church. He does this not through controversy or confrontation, but through the gentle persuasion of answered prayer and experienced blessing. This evangelistic aspect of St. Anthony's intercession is another reason why spreading his devotion is so important. When people experience his power, they often become curious about the faith tradition that produced such a powerful intercessor. The saint becomes a bridge between people and the Catholic Church, leading them gradually toward fuller participation in Christian life. The effectiveness of the St. Anthony prayer ultimately depends on faith, not just intellectual belief, but deep trust in God's power and St. Anthony's intercession. This faith is developed through prayer, study, and experience. The more you pray to St. Anthony, the more you'll experience his power, and the more your faith will grow. Faith is not a feeling. It's a choice to trust God's goodness even when circumstances seem hopeless. St. Anthony responds to this kind of faith because he himself lived by it during his earthly life. He preached to fish when people wouldn't listen. He trusted in God's provision when resources were scarce, and he never gave up on anyone, no matter how lost they seemed. This is the kind of faith that moves mountains and opens heaven. When you pray to St. Anthony with this deep trust, you're not just asking for a favor. You're participating in the divine plan for your life. You're acknowledging that God has solutions you can't see and resources you can't access through human effort alone. A retired police officer named Frank from Detroit learned this lesson during his battle with depression after losing his partner in the line of duty. For months, he had been struggling with guilt, anger, and despair. Traditional therapy wasn't helping, and he was considering ending his life. A chaplain at the police department suggested he try praying to St. Anthony, known for helping people find hope when it seems lost. Frank was skeptical but desperate. He followed the preparation requirements, including going to confession for the first time in 20 years. When he prayed the St. Anthony prayer, he didn't ask for happiness or success. He simply asked for the strength to keep living. He prayed with the faith of someone who had exhausted all other options. The change wasn't immediate, but it was real. Over the following weeks, Frank began to experience moments of peace that gradually grew longer and more frequent. He found himself thinking about his partner's family and feeling called to help them. He started a foundation to support families of fallen officers, and this work gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the tragedy. Frank's depression didn't disappear overnight, but his relationship with St. Anthony gave him the strength to work through it. He continued praying to the saint daily, and he found that each prayer session left him with renewed hope and direction. The miracle wasn't in the elimination of his pain, but in the transformation of his pain into a source of healing for others. This story demonstrates how St. Anthony's intercession sometimes works through gradual transformation rather than instant solutions. The saint understands that some problems require time to heal properly, and he provides the grace needed to persevere through the process. His intercession doesn't always change circumstances immediately, but it always changes the person who prays with genuine faith. The patience required for this kind of prayer is itself a spiritual discipline. In our instant gratification culture, we often expect prayers to be answered as quickly as internet searches. But Saint Anthony teaches us that some blessings require preparation, some miracles require time, and some prayers are answered in ways we don't initially recognize. Learning to pray with patience doesn't mean being passive. It means continuing to take appropriate action while trusting in Saint Anthony's intercession. It means watching for signs of his intervention while working diligently on your own behalf. It means maintaining hope even when progress seems slow. A young mother named Lisa from Canada experienced this balance during her struggle with infertility. She and her husband had been trying to conceive for 3 years without success. Medical treatments had failed, and doctors couldn't explain why she wasn't getting pregnant. Lisa began praying to Saint Anthony, asking for the miracle of a child. Month after month passed with no pregnancy. Lisa's faith was tested severely, but she continued praying and following the preparation requirements. She also continued with medical treatments, pursued adoption options, and took care of her health. She refused to become passive in her waiting, but she also refused to give up hope in Saint Anthony's intercession. After 18 months of prayer, Lisa and her husband were approved for adoption. The day they were scheduled to meet their prospective child, Lisa discovered she was pregnant. The timing was so perfect that they were able to adopt one child and welcome their biological child within months of each other. Lisa credits Saint Anthony with orchestrating both blessings simultaneously. This story illustrates how Saint Anthony sometimes provides multiple solutions to the same problem. He doesn't just give people what they ask for, he gives them what they need, often in ways that exceed their original expectations. Lisa asked for one child and received 2, through different means, but at the perfect time. The lesson here is to remain open to unexpected answers while maintaining specific requests. Saint Anthony has access to possibilities we can't imagine, and he delights in surprising people with blessings that surpass their dreams. This is why the prayer includes the phrase, "If it is God's will." It acknowledges that divine wisdom might have better plans than our human understanding. Please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell if you're finding these stories helpful. We share powerful testimonies and practical spiritual guidance that can strengthen your faith and prayer life. There's one more aspect of Saint Anthony's intercession that deserves special attention: his protection of families. Throughout his earthly life, he was known for reuniting families, reconciling estranged relatives, and protecting children from harm. This pastoral care continues in his heavenly intercession, making him particularly effective for family-related prayers. Parents often turn to Saint Anthony when their children are in trouble, whether physical danger, spiritual crisis, or life difficulties. The saint has a special love for young people and a unique ability to guide them through challenges while respecting their free will. He doesn't force solutions, but he creates opportunities for healing and growth. A father named Antonio from Mexico prayed to Saint Anthony when his teenage son became involved with drugs and gang activity. The boy had been arrested twice and was facing serious legal consequences. Antonio felt helpless watching his son's life spiral out of control despite his best efforts at intervention. Antonio began praying the Saint Anthony prayer daily, asking not just for his son's safety, but for his conversion of heart. He also increased his charitable giving and volunteer work with at-risk youth in his community. This wasn't about earning God's favor, but about aligning his heart with Saint Anthony's care for young people. The breakthrough came when Antonio's son was arrested again and faced the possibility of adult prison time. In jail, the boy met a chaplain who had a special devotion to Saint Anthony. The chaplain shared the saint's story and taught the boy to pray to him. For the first time in years, Antonio's son began to pray seriously and think about changing his life. Through a series of circumstances that seemed almost impossible, the boy was accepted into a residential treatment program instead of receiving a prison sentence. The program was run by a Catholic organization with a strong devotion to Saint Anthony. During his time there, the boy experienced a genuine conversion and developed his own relationship with the saint. Today, Antonio's son is clean, employed, and actively involved in his parish. He credits Saint Anthony with saving his life and giving him a second chance. The father and son now pray together regularly, and their relationship has been completely healed. Antonio's patient prayer and St. Anthony's powerful intercession transformed a family tragedy into a testimony of hope. This story demonstrates how St. Anthony's intercession can work through multiple people and institutions to achieve complex solutions. The saint doesn't just work miracles in isolation. He coordinates the efforts of parents, counselors, chaplains, and programs to create comprehensive healing. His intercession often involves building networks of support that provide long-term stability. Family situations are often the most complex problems that St. Anthony handles, requiring changes in multiple people's hearts and coordination of various circumstances. This is why family-related prayers sometimes take longer to answer. The saint is working on several levels simultaneously to create lasting solutions rather than temporary fixes. The key to effective family prayer is to pray not just for changed circumstances but for changed hearts. St. Anthony can't force people to make good decisions, but he can create conditions that make good decisions more attractive and achievable. He specializes in opening hearts to grace and creating encounters that lead to conversion. A grandmother named Eleanor from England experienced this principle when her adult daughter stopped speaking to the family after a bitter divorce. The daughter had become angry and withdrawn, cutting off all contact with her parents and siblings. Eleanor's grandchildren were caught in the middle, and the entire family was suffering from the division. Eleanor began praying to St. Anthony for family reconciliation, but she also prayed for wisdom to understand her daughter's pain. Through this prayer, she realized that her daughter felt judged and unsupported by the family during her divorce. Eleanor began writing letters of apology and love, even though they weren't answered. St. Anthony's intercession came through Eleanor's other grandchildren, who began asking their aunt about their grandmother's letters. The children's innocent questions gradually wore down the daughter's resistance, and she began to see that her mother's love was genuine. A tentative reconciliation began that eventually led to full family healing. The miracle wasn't just in the reconciliation itself, but in the transformation of Eleanor's heart. Through praying to St. Anthony, she gained the humility to recognize her own contributions to the family conflict and the courage to take responsibility for them. This change in her approach made reconciliation possible. This story illustrates how St. Anthony's intercession often begins with changes in the person who is praying. The saint helps us see situations more clearly, understand others' perspectives, and take appropriate action. He doesn't just change external circumstances, he changes us in ways that make better outcomes possible. The family healing aspect of St. Anthony's intercession is particularly relevant in our current culture, where family breakdown is common and reconciliation seems impossible. The saint offers hope to families that seem permanently divided, relationships that appear irreparably damaged, and situations that look hopeless from a human perspective. Comment below if you've experienced St. Anthony's help with family healing, or if you're currently praying for family reconciliation. These testimonies encourage others who are dealing with similar situations and remind us that no family problem is too difficult for St. Anthony's intercession. As we approach the conclusion of our time together, I want to share one final story that illustrates the comprehensive nature of St. Anthony's intercession. This story comes from a woman named Catherine from Australia, who experienced multiple miracles through a single prayer request. Catherine's husband had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease at age 52. The diagnosis was devastating for their family, which included 3 teenage children. Catherine faced the prospect of caring for her husband while raising their children and managing the family's finances. She felt completely overwhelmed and turned to St. Anthony in desperation. Catherine followed all the preparation requirements and began praying the St. Anthony prayer daily. She asked not just for her husband's healing, but for the strength to handle whatever God allowed. She also asked for protection and guidance for her children during this difficult time. The first miracle came in the form of a clinical trial for a new Alzheimer's treatment. Catherine's husband was accepted into the trial, and the experimental drug significantly slowed the progression of his disease. He remained functional for several years longer than doctors had predicted, giving the family precious time together. The second miracle was financial. Catherine had been worried about medical expenses and the loss of her husband's income. An insurance policy that they had forgotten about was discovered, providing substantial coverage for his care. Additionally, Catherine's part-time job became full-time with a significant raise, giving her the income needed to support the family. The third miracle was in their children's response to the crisis. Instead of rebelling or withdrawing, all three teenagers grew closer to their parents and took on additional responsibilities willingly. They formed a strong support network for each other and developed a maturity that served them well throughout their lives. The fourth miracle was in the couple's marriage. Despite the tremendous stress of the illness, Catherine and her husband grew closer during his decline. They had meaningful conversations, shared precious memories, and experienced a depth of love that they had never known before. Their relationship became a source of strength rather than additional stress. Catherine's husband eventually passed away peacefully, surrounded by his family. But the blessings continued even after his death. The children all pursued careers in healthcare, inspired by their father's courage and their mother's faith. Catherine became a support group leader for other families dealing with Alzheimer's, using her experience to help others. This comprehensive blessing illustrates how St. Anthony's intercession often goes far beyond the original request. Catherine asked for strength to handle her husband's illness, but she received healing for her whole family's future. The saint saw the entire situation and provided grace for every aspect of their need. The story also demonstrates how St. Anthony's intercession can transform tragedy into triumph. He doesn't always prevent suffering, but he provides the grace needed to grow through it. He specializes in bringing good out of evil, hope out of despair, and blessing out of crisis. This is perhaps the most important lesson about St. Anthony's intercession. It's not just about getting what we want, but about discovering what God wants to give us. The saint helps us see our situations through divine eyes and receive blessings we didn't know we needed. If you've stayed with us through this entire presentation, you've demonstrated the kind of faith and persistence that St. Anthony rewards. The fact that you're seeking to understand his intercession more deeply shows that you're ready to experience his power in your own life. Take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to our channel. But more importantly, take a moment to commit to developing a real relationship with St. Anthony. Don't just use this prayer as a one-time solution. Make it the beginning of a lifelong devotion that will bring you countless blessings. The prayer to St. Anthony that I've shared with you has been tested by millions of Catholics over many centuries. It has proven effective in every kind of crisis, for every type of person, in every corner of the world. But its effectiveness depends on your faith, your preparation, and your willingness to keep the promises you make. As you begin praying to St. Anthony, remember that you're not just asking for help. You're entering into a relationship with a powerful friend in heaven. The saint delights in helping people, but he also delights in being known and loved. Give him both your requests and your affection, and you'll discover that his intercession brings blessings beyond your imagination. Your miracle may come quickly, or it may require patience. It may look exactly like what you asked for, or it may surprise you with something better. But if you approach St. Anthony with genuine faith and proper preparation, it will come. The saint has never failed to help those who turn to him with sincere hearts. Share this video with everyone you know who needs a miracle. Tell them about St. Anthony's power and teach them this prayer. Your sharing might be the answer to someone's desperate prayer, and St. Anthony will reward your evangelistic efforts with continued blessings for your own life. Remember, the saint is waiting to help you. He's been waiting since the moment you first heard his name. All you need to do is prepare your heart, speak the prayer, and trust in his intercession. Your miracle is closer than you think, and St. Anthony is ready to make it happen. May St. Anthony's powerful intercession bring you the miracle you need, the peace you seek, and the faith you desire. May his example inspire you to live a life of holiness, charity, and trust in God's providence. And may his friendship accompany you through every challenge and blessing of your life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support helps us continue bringing you powerful prayers and inspiring stories that can transform your spiritual life. Until next time, may God bless you and keep you under St. Anthony's protection.